Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Wu Library lecture series. The topic that I chose to speak about today, in a way, it's a little bit dated. In another way, it's perhaps not not dated yet, but just in its initial stage. The topic is a Buddhist perspective on Occupy Wall Street. And certainly I'm not going to be quoting from the Buddha's text to see what the Buddha said about Occupy Wall Street, since Occupy Wall Street was something that developed only last year, and the Buddha had no knowledge of it 2,500 years ago. But what I'm going to try to do is to draw out some of the principles of Buddhism and see how they can be used to. I think it would be better if there are babies that they not be kept in the library, because it will be disturbing to other people. Okay, so what I intend to do is to first give an overview of the meaning of Occupy Wall Street, how it came to be, what its significance is, then to take a look at some of the social teachings of the Buddha, which are often neglected in present-day presentations of the Buddha's teaching, and then see how we can use these social teachings as a lens for drawing out the implications of Occupy Wall Street and seeing what kind of sustainable, long-term principles can be derived. Okay, Kaiti, if that's the printout, I'll take that. Can be derived from Occupy Wall Street. Okay, thank you. Okay, now, in the traditional biography of the Buddha that we find in the Pali commentaries, they have a way of treating the life of the Buddha in terms of what they call the long-term or far distant origins of the coming to being of the Buddha, the middle-length background to the arising of the Buddha, and then the immediate background to the arising of the Buddha. And so it occurred to me that we could treat the origination of Occupy Wall Street in terms of these three time frames of looking at this particular movement. And so I begin with sort of the long-range perspective on the background to the arising of Occupy Wall Street. And this takes us far back past the year 2011 to the period, maybe the middle 1970s, late 1970s, when there came a dramatic change in the movement of the American economy. The period after World War II, through World War II, and after World War II, from 1945 to about 1975, was a period of sustained, very vigorous growth, economic growth. It seemed that class distinctions were leveling off, that America was developing a very extensive middle class, that even though there were still many weak spots in the American framework of social justice, particularly with regarding race relations, but still it seemed that we were making gradual progress, and we were on the way to a very broad egalitarian society in which everybody would have some way to contribute to the democratic process, which was the governing principle of this country. But starting about the middle 1970s and then accelerating, especially in the 1980s, there came a dramatic change in direction of the economy. What happened was that the basic principles of a liberal, social democratic principle of social organization, which had governed the United States in the post-war period, was replaced by a new vision of the economy, which is known as neoliberal economics. Neoliberal economics held that in order for the economy to grow and to benefit as many people as possible, the government has to step back from its role of regulating the economy and instead take a back seat and let the forces of the free market govern the development of the economy on their own. And so what happened was that government regulations were gradually downsized or downscaled. The market was given increasingly free rein to move according to its own dynamics. And so what happened, rather than a gradual and equitable distribution of the wealth of the country, as a result of the ascent of this free market neoliberal economic system, as more and more wealth was produced by the workforce, that wealth was being channeled into the hands of an increasingly smaller and smaller, but richer and richer and more powerful economic and financial elite. And so to see what was taking place in the unfolding of the American economy over this period, I've collected a number of diagrams. I hope they'll show up. Let's see. Now I have to put my glasses on. Okay. Okay, this shows the relationship between productivity of wages, how much wealth was being produced by the labor force, and wages during the period from 1947 that goes up to about 2008, this diagram. It doesn't even take in developments that took place after the great financial crash of 2008. So we have increasing productivity, you could see, of the workforce, so that productivity in 2008 was roughly 3 times that of productivity in 1947. And yet here we could see the wages that were being paid, they were climbing from 1947 up till they reached a plateau somewhere around 1975. Then there was a period of somewhat with slight variations around that plateau. Then 1980, they start taking a dive and a little bit increasing here. And I think if we were to continue beyond 2008 through 2009 to 2012, there would be probably another sharp downward decline. Okay, so where is all of this extra wealth going to? This difference between wages and productivity. Who's getting it? It's not going to the workers. The next chart will show you what has been happening. Let's see if I can reduce this a little bit. Can you see in the back? Okay, this is the ratio of the earnings of the top 100 top CEOs, their salaries in relation to the earnings of the average worker, the annual earnings of the average worker. Okay, in 1970, the top CEOs were making 45 times, or $45 for every dollar that a worker was making. 1980, it's going up, $127 per $1. 1990, it looks like $321 per dollar. 2000, a gigantic jump takes place here to over $1,500 for every dollar that a worker is earning. And by 2006, it's up to $7,223 for every dollar a worker is earning. Okay, then this chart will show you how wealth is being the changes in the actual family income per quintile, that is, per 20% or 1/5 of the population. Okay, so the bottom 20%, this is the change of family income from 1979 to 2006. Again, I have to point out that there have probably been far more significant changes after 2006, which are not shown in this table. But here we have the bottom 20%. There's been those who are earning less than $27,000 per year. There's been roughly a zero increase in earnings. Those in the second 20%, a 10% increase. The third quintile, the third 20%, a 16% increase. The fourth quintile, a 27% increase. And the top 20%, a 57% increase. But within the top 20%, when we take a smaller fraction, the top 5% within the whole, within all of the families, top 5% of families, the increase in wealth jumped 87%. And at the same time, now this is rather fascinating, at the same time that the earnings of the wealthy people are increasing more and more steeply, the tax rates are dropping for the highest earners. Now this is what made the American society increasingly egalitarian during World War II, actually beginning from the late 1930s through World War II and in the post-war period, was the progressive income tax, according to which those in higher earning brackets have to pay a higher percentage of their earnings in the form of income tax. But even with very high earnings, they were not satisfied with this, and so as part of the deregulation process and the ascent of neoliberal economics, the income tax on the highest earners were gradually, sometimes not gradually, but rather sharply decreased on the grounds that decreasing their income tax would give them more money to start more businesses, to increase their businesses, and thereby hire more people, and thereby leading to a more productive economy. Okay, so here we see in the 1990s, there's still some traces of increase in the income tax. It reaches a peak perhaps around 1993, and now we have two groups here. One shown with red are households with income over $1 million. And you see that this has quite a sharp decline on its own till we start off here in 1992 with income tax at the rate of a roughly 27% income tax, which was in itself a great decline from the period of when the Democrats held power in the post-war period, with Roosevelt, during the time of Roosevelt, and then Truman. I think the income tax on the top earners was 91%. Is that correct? Okay, but then during the Reagan years, the income tax on the top earners was decreased. It seems during the Clinton period, it went up at first, but then it starts declining. And then it declines down to 2007. It's roughly 22%. But within the top bracket income level, there is the top 400 households, and look what happens to their income tax. Okay, it starts to go up for some time, then starting 1995, it declines sharply, levels off for a period, then perhaps through the tax cuts implemented by the Bush administration, then it drops still further. Then this ends at 2007, but with the tax cuts still in effect, even today, the tax levels have probably gone down even more. Okay, this shows the income share of top 1%. If this ends at 2005, there are actually more interesting figures to come. Okay, now, one particular strength that a higher income makes possible, and that is the ability to influence politics. Because those with a lot of concentrated wealth can use their wealth to make campaign contributions. Those who are the heads, the directors of corporations, can lobby on the behalf of the interests of their corporations. And there is what is known as a revolving door between corporations and politics, so that those who are in responsible positions in corporations, when a favorable administration comes into power, they might move from the corporate board of directors to a post within the administration where they can influence policy to favor the corporation, to favor their corporate interests. And then those who have been in responsible positions in politics can move out of their political position onto the boards of directors of corporations. And so there's a constant revolving door or exchange of a small clique of individuals who are working, on the one hand, in industry, on the other hand, in political administrations. And so when we look at the political contributions in the year 2010, we see the contributions of business, and this is pretty light, I would say, compared to political contributions in 2012, but $1,317,000,000. And labor, of course, also tries to influence politics, but labor has much less wealth to spend on campaign contributions than businessmen do. And so the contribution of labor to campaigns, to election campaigns, is somewhere around $92 million. So this shows who is actually running government. We say government of the people, by the people, for the people. Which people? Mostly the people in business, the heads of the financial institutions, major corporations. Okay, this chart here shows the increase in the amount of unemployment. This is from the year 2000 to the year 2010. Okay, so we see that the year 2000, unemployment was put at 5.7%. It starts increasing. For some reason, there's a little decrease here, some fluctuation up and down. But with the major recession that started in late 2008, we see the amount of unemployment shoots up, almost doubles to 14.3 in 2009, 14.5 in 2010. And probably the amount, if you take the amount of unemployment and underemployment together, that is, people who are highly qualified in terms of having university degrees, who might be working as cooks, waiters and waitresses in restaurants, stock clerks. The number of unemployed and underemployed together would be much higher, perhaps 25%. And then money, this is very significant, that many of the long-term unemployed will never work again. Somebody in their 50s loses their job. They have no opportunity to take, often they have no chance to get another job. In a sense, they're screwed. Okay, this shows the assets of the top 6 banks as percent of the US economy in this is a rather fuzzy chart. I think it's 1994. 17% of the economy. As of 2009, 63,000. Okay, these are some what I call revealing facts and figures that I was able to gather off the internet. Okay, the share of US wealth held by the bottom 50% of Americans, 1.1%. The share held by the bottom 40%, 0.3%. The share of US wealth held by the top 1%, 34.5%. That held by the top 10%, 74.5%. And the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune, these are the members of the Walton family, own more wealth than the bottom 30% of all Americans. Okay, then between 2009 and 2010, these are years which were not shown on these charts, which are dated. 93% of all new income generated went to the top 1% of the US population, while 7% of all new income went to the remaining 99% of the population. So you can see that an antithesis is developing here between the 1% and the 99%. And this will form one of the themes, in fact, the rallying slogan of Occupy Wall Street. We are the 99%. Okay, so this is what I would call the long-term background to the arising of Occupy Wall Street. It's not that everybody who participated in Occupy Wall Street was aware of these exact figures, but I think they had a pretty good sense, just about all of them, that the overwhelming majority of benefits from the development of the US economy was going to a very small, privileged coterie of corporate executives and financial hedge fund managers, while the great overwhelming majority of the population were just getting a little sliver of that wealth. I think one economist compared it to, I think it was Joseph Stiglitz, who compared it to, if you have a cake And there are about 12 people sitting around the table, rubbing their hands as the cake is served on the table. Then one person takes the cake, cuts it into, let's say, 12 people, 12 slices, and he takes 11 slices, and he says to the rest of the people, okay, there's one slice left. You 11 guys, cut it up between you and enjoy. Okay, now against this long-term background, there were several events that took place more recently that provided, you could say, the provocation for the arising of Occupy Wall Street. One of these, of course, was the financial crash of late 2008, 2009, in which the major banks and financial institutions in this country had been engaging in reckless financial practices, wild lending practices, using very complex financial instruments in order to lend money that was very unlikely to be paid back. They were taking very wild, reckless risks with other people's money. And so when the hollowness at the core of the economic system, the financial system, became evident, the financial system started to topple down, and the banks came running. Some of them actually crashed, and other banks came running to the government, saying that in order to survive, we're too big to fail, and so you have to bail us out. And so the banks provided the bailouts, the government provided the bailouts, which saved the banks. Bailouts to the tune of, they say, $800 billion, $900 billion, but other commentators speculate that actually much more than that was involved. And so the banks requested the money so that they would be able to ostensibly lend the money to people who wanted to start businesses, to consumers who would start consumption, thereby boosting up the economy again. But the bankers, the banking executives, dealt themselves very generous raises in their salaries, extra bonuses, but they didn't lend, they didn't use the money in the way they pledged to. And so because of this, again, the economy remained in a frozen, petrified condition. Unemployment remained high, and ordinary people felt themselves in rather desperate situations. Okay, so this was one I call this middle range causal factor. Another causal factor, I think, was increasing disillusionment with the Obama administration. Obama came into power with promises of the audacity of hope, with the slogan, "Yes, we can." And once in office, the audacity of hope turned into hope for audacity. Show a little audacity, and "yes, we can" became a kind of head clenching, it seems we can't. And so the ordinary people who would work so enthusiastically to put Obama into power were wondering, what's going on? It seems that there's not much difference between this administration and the previous administration. And so there came this great disappointment and disillusionment amongst people on the progressive wing. But on the other side of the fence, there rose up against the Obama administration a new movement called the Tea Party, or the Tea Baggers, who claim that Obama was a radical socialist who was undertaking the most drastic measures that this country has ever gone through, who was ruling the country almost as a personal dictatorship, a personal fiefdom. And they clamored especially against the healthcare program that Obama had proposed. And so the Tea Party showed that it's possible for ordinary people, even though these ordinary people were sponsored by very wealthy, very powerful, extremist, right-wing millionaires and billionaires, but that ordinary people, if they got together, they could make their voices heard and exercise some influence on government policy. The third close factor that, or let's say middle range factor, that stimulated the arising of Occupy Wall Street was a surprising development that took place in a part of the world that most people had given up as being the most backward, most autocratic, most hopelessly dictatorial part of the world. And this is the Middle East, let's say the Arab autocracies of the Middle East. It started in Tunisia when there came an uprising against the long-term established dictatorship of, what was the name of the dictator of Tunisia again? Speak up. Anybody? Okay, doesn't matter. Anyway, the dictator of Tunisia was overthrown, kicked out of office. Then that stimulated an uprising in Egypt, which led to the overthrow of the long-term president, who was really a dictator, Mubarak. Then there came uprisings in Libya, Syria, Bahrain, Yemen. Not all of them were successful, but it did show that it's possible when people are worked up enough about injustices, about suppression, about a sense of powerlessness, that they will make their voices heard, that they will show courage, and in certain cases that it is possible to transform political systems. Okay, so we have here the disappointment with the Obama, well, let's take, starting with the financial crash of 2008, 2009, the disappointment with the policies of the Obama administration, the rise of the Tea Party is a demonstration that it's possible for citizens groups to make their voices heard, to capture national attention, and the spread of uprisings across the Middle East, and not only in the Middle East, but also in Greece, in Spain, Israel, and still other countries. People rising up against, in those countries, against neoliberal regimes which were demanding cuts to social services, policies of economic austerity. And then came when it seemed that everybody was looking at the United States and saying, the United States is hopeless. It's a country which is in a long-term slumber. An organization called the Adbusters, I believe it's based in Canada, but it sent out a tweet message on September 27th, Occupy Wall Street. Just a very simple tweet message like that, but people picked it up, and on September 27th, September 17th, a number of people, roughly 1,000 people, gathered at Wall Street, and eventually they occupied what is known as Zuccotti Park, which they renamed Liberty Park. Originally, when they started, they didn't intend to occupy the park long term. They thought that it would last just for a few days, a week, but as one day passed and led into the next day, more and more people started to converge on Liberty Park until a giant movement was developing there. And once word about the Occupy Wall Street development spread out across the country within a matter of weeks, a month, think 500 cities in the United States witnessed Occupy movements taking over sections of their cities, their towns, college campuses, and the movement spread around the world till at the peak there were 1,500 Occupy movements, according to the figures that I've managed to gather. Okay, this is kind of background to Occupy Wall Street. And now what exactly was the sort of motivating force behind Occupy Wall Street? What did they stand for? And this was something of a problem for the mainstream media to try to figure out, because usually when there are protests, demonstrations, at least over the last 20, 30 years, they usually focus upon a single issue. It's been the feminists, or it's been civil rights movements for African Americans, or it's been a wage increase for laborers, or it's been for gay rights, or it's been for protecting the environment, or against some kind of project which is destructive of the environment. And yet here was a movement which was not articulating specific demands, but rather it crystallized not so much around a specific agenda, but rather around an idea. And this idea was formulated in the slogan that became the kind of watchword of the Occupy movement: "We are the 99%. And this slogan was a way of expressing a kind of deep dissatisfaction or disenchantment with corporate financial capitalism. It was a slogan that expressed an awareness of what the diagrams that I showed you a while ago were illustrating. It was an awareness that within the United States, more and more, the wealth that the country was producing was not being distributed equitably amongst the people, but that the wealth was being concentrated in the hands of this privileged corporate and financial elite. And moreover, not only was the wealth being channeled into the hands of this elite, but that the political system was no longer working for ordinary people. Elections are held, people have the right to vote, but once the votes are cast, first of all, the candidates that are put up for election are usually those who are favored to one degree or another by the dominant corporations and financial interests. They are the ones who sponsor the campaigns through their contributions, and they are the ones who control policy after the candidates are elected. So there came a sense that the political system and the economic system were linked together in a kind of synthesis, or we call a symbiotic relationship, the two supporting each other, but not supporting the ordinary people of the country. And this gave rise, I would say, to a perception, even if not clearly formulated, that there was a tension or a disparity between the ideals and moral values around which the country was supposedly to be governed, and the hard realities of the way the country was being governed. The ideals or the dominant values emphasized equality, that everybody has an equal contribution to make to the development of the country, liberty, that we should all be free to express ourselves, to do what we want to do, that we all have the opportunity, equality of opportunity, to a chance to become upwardly mobile, to advance through hard work, to live a comfortable life. that we all have the right to education, to basic health care, and so on. And yet, the hard realities, the facts on the ground, were that power, privilege, wealth were moving into the hands of an increasingly smaller, richer number of people, while the great majority felt powerless, disconnected, alienated, and disillusioned with the system. Okay, and so one driving force was this sense of disillusionment with corporate capitalism because of the economic disadvantages that it promoted. But I think underlying the Occupy movement was not only an economic disillusionment. It's not a case simply that people feel that a few people are getting wealthy, we are not getting our share of the pie. But also there was another facet to the Occupy movement, which I think it's not as clearly stated, but it's equally as important. And that is a sense that this capitalist-dominated social order is not conducive to the sense of human community. Rather, it fosters competitiveness, alienation between one person and another, a sense of isolation, the sense that we are each out or should be out for ourselves, and that the only value on which people are to be rated is their personal income, their social class and income. So if people can increase their income and move up in the social scale, then they are regarded as more valuable. Those who have lesser earning power, who are not working in as prestigious jobs, feel themselves to be left out of this struggle for domination, to have been defeated in this kind of war of each against all. So there was a feeling that society has to be a true social unity, that people have to have meaningful relationships based on cooperation, collaboration, and mutual respect. Competition might have its place, but it has to take place alongside collaboration, cooperation, and human relatedness. And so within the camps that were set up at the various sites of the Occupy movement, it's said that the camps themselves were a performative demonstration of the values that motivated the Occupy movement. What is meant by this is that the camps were operated according to the principles that the participants wanted to see actualized in American society at large. That is, decisions were not made through some hierarchical chain of command where there would be leaders at the top who would give commands to those on the lowest strata of the movement, but rather decisions were made at what they called the general meetings that were held every evening through consensus. Everybody would have a chance to contribute their point of view. Everybody could speak their mind. And decisions would be arrived at not through a simple majority vote, but through every attempt to balance out the interests and points of view of everybody till all of the participants could be satisfied. Of course, one can't satisfy everybody, but this was the ideal at which they strove. And the spirit of this consensual-based decision-making was enhanced by the fact that the city of New York refused to give the participants of Occupy Wall Street permission to use amplifiers, sound amplifiers, like I have here just in this small library, but I can use a microphone so the people at the back can hear. But here, when it's in a big park, relatively big park, there might be several thousand people extending much further than the people in the back row here, and it's outdoors, so the sound does not reverberate off the walls and ceiling. So how can the people in the back hear? The method used was what they call the people's mic, which meant that the speaker, the person who wants to speak, would call out, mic check, mic check. Then everybody would recognize him and he would have the right to speak. And when he speaks, he would have to speak in small, short phrases, just a few words at a time. And then everybody close to him in the audience would shout out the words that he would speak so that the people in the back could hear. And then sometimes if it was a very big gathering, the echoing of each statement would have to go through successive rows so that everybody who is participating is repeating the words of the speaker. So in this way, even if one disagrees with a statement, one has to utter it out loud. And this gives one a chance to reflect on the statement and perhaps change one's point of view. So this is called horizontal decision-making rather than vertical decision-making. Okay, Occupy Wall Street came to a premature end. It was building up to something of a climax around the middle of November. Then the cold weather set in late November. And still the numbers of people participating diminished. But then in December, I believe it was, the city government sent out the police to break up Occupy Wall Street using some pretext that it was disturbing the peace, or that it was not sufficiently sanitary. And so they were broken up, all the tents were removed, people were expelled, and it came to an end. In some places also there were some disagreeable aspects of the Occupy movement. In New York City, when I'm told that it was attracting derelict types of people, drug users, drug peddlers. In Oakland, California, it had attracted a certain violent sections who believed that they could use anarchical, destructive methods in order to enforce their point. But I think that kind of development was quite antithetical to the original spirit of the organizers, who insisted on policies of strict nonviolence in achieving their aims. Okay, I want now, what is the time now? Okay. Should we take maybe a 5-10 minute break now? Then I will come into the Buddhist perspective on Occupy Wall Street. Okay, we'll take our break now.